honor. I feel like you add so much to my life, and I'm sure everybody else that listens, because the guests you lined up, the book recommendations you make are perfect. So I thank you. Is this a normal time you wake up, or is this
I actually do. I normally get up around 6:30 or so. So that's not that. It's just that, for video, making sure that I don't look like a total, I literally just rolled out of bed, just needed 2 minutes.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So, Hunter, I'm not going to embarrass you with your long list of credentials, because a lot of times I like to look at individuals and not even look at the individual, but the message, and not judge exactly who's saying it. Also, that's because I don't have nearly the credentials you have, which are just absolutely impressive. I'm going to do an intro, and I won't embarrass you now. Talk about Harvard, talk about you went to school with Prince Harry and Prince William. I'm going to embarrass you some more. You worth oodles of dollars. And I've seen other
That's actually
podcasts.
not true. That's actually a funny story. The oodles of dollars is not true. Believe it or not, reality TV is mostly lies.
What are you talking about?
What? You're destroying my whole world. Now you're going to tell me that wrestling is also fake.
What?
What?
But your family, what you're really rich in, I think, is knowledge, and also this passion to you. You don't have to do all this stuff that you do. Especially, you didn't have to write this straight A conspiracy. Most people would want to build up that wall. They would want to say, I went to elite schools. I'm genetically gifted. My brain is immense, and normal people walk around and say, yeah, that's true. But you're actually breaking walls down. Where did that come from?
Well, like Bryan Callen from the Bryan Callen Show, both of our dads worked for Citibank, and the result of that is that we moved around a lot all over the world. And I think the most powerful experience for me was when I was 10, we went back to Brazil to visit, because I'd lived in Brazil, and we went back to visit some friends. And I remember one day we were driving along in a car, and there were all these kids who were probably my age, pushing themselves on little carts through the streets. Begging, literally between the cars, weaving between the traffic, and they had limbs missing, legs, arms, things like that. And I asked my parents, I couldn't understand how there were so many, and they basically explained that these kids their parents had cut off their arms and legs so they could be better beggars.
In Brazil?
In Brazil, yeah.
I thought that was strictly happening in India, but...
Well, I think that's the interesting thing is you find that anywhere where there's that sort of extreme poverty. And that's, one of the big things that we talk about on the Bryan Callen Show is people respond to incentives. It's obviously a really, really screwed up thing to do, but in the circumstances that these people have been put in, it's a natural response. They're, in inverted commas, smart enough to figure out that, if you want to increase your begging, this is what you do.
Do you feel that they've been put into that position? Do you feel like, obviously, we have a lot of context as far as the show. I've listened to every episode. As a matter of fact, I've listened probably more than once to a couple episodes. So, guns, germs, and steel, Europeans coming to other lands. Should we have just left them as hunters and gatherers in small tribes? Do you think they would do better in that situation?
I think it's a really, firstly, we now know a lot about the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. It actually turns out to be a pretty sweet deal.
Yes.
I was just listening to one of the great lecture courses, whatever those things are called, about Africa. And supposedly, they found that hunter-gatherer bushmen spend about 15 hours a week working for their food. Yes. And the rest of it is leisure time. So, the switch to agriculture and then the switch to industry leads to a massive downturn in leisure time. Now, as things become more and more industrialized, there's more and more leisure time, and then you find people like you and me who are, I don't have to work for my daily bread every single day. Now let me find more interesting ways to earn my daily bread. I think I think there is such a thing as, a white man's guilt. And I think we do feel incredibly guilty, and rightly so, for the things that our ancestors did and the ways that we benefited. I think realistically, humans look for opportunities. And, where if you look at the North American continent, there were millions of people living there, and the Europeans thought they could use that land better. I think even if we wanted to say leave it alone, I don't think that was realistic at that stage of knowledge. I think, like anything, hopefully humanity learns from its mistakes. And if we were given a second chance to do that first contact, I think we would do it very differently. I think one of the great tragedies is, for example, that the Spanish missionaries destroyed all of those Aztec and Inca records. And
I feel just as passionate as you, because I study ancient history, or I'm fascinated by ancient history, and I want to know what actually happened. And now we'll never know.
And what were their cultures like? I mean, we have these sort of fragmentary glimpses. But listen, James Cameron can sit around and come up with a whole new world. There already was one there, and it was much, much richer than the world of Avatar, and it would be fascinating to get immersed in that. But,
Do you subscribe, and I'm sorry, the Skype lag kills me, but do you subscribe to any of the alternative human timeline theories where maybe we had a great, I'm talking Graham Hancock, I don't know if you're familiar.
You mean like the alien context stuff?
No. Like the ancient pyramids were dated, but it's very tough to date exactly when they were made, and there's controversy over whether the Sphinx had a different face, had a lion face, and then there was conquerors that changed the face, and that there was a great flood. So there's a lot of flood myths out there, and Atlantis could have been actually a real place. And all of this adds up to there's a big 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age quickly comes to an end, and a lot of civilizations that were on the water were wiped out. Do you ever think about that?
Well, I think that's the thing. There's a few interesting things. Firstly, we definitely know that conquerors had a long, long history of taking other people's monuments. And building a monument is expensive, so much easier to just rebrand it, slap on, a new sticker, and then it's like, oh, now it advertises Coca-Cola, now it advertises, Tiberius or whoever it is. So, that sort of stuff is definitely credible. I think I don't know specifically about, this Graham Hancock guy. Was that his name?
I think you would like him. He's a British author, and he's pretty fascinating. He goes to a lot of sites. He has a geologist look at the stone, and he makes decisions based on, or not decisions, but he says the timeline could have been for a lot of reasons. The Bible perhaps had influenced how long it would date the pyramids, and it seems odd that there would be such perfect structures, and then as their civilization kept going, the structures got not as nice. They started making this pyramids with small blocks. I won't get into this philosophy because I want to talk straight at conspiracy, and I wrote 100 questions for you. I'm not kidding.
That's great.
We're not going to get to it, but you have empowered me in a lot of ways, and I think the straight A conspiracy empowers everybody that's going to read it that might have felt like they were gypped or they were not as intelligent. I personally, and this is just from life experience, maybe I was taught this, that I wasn't a good reader, that I was dyslexic. Do you believe in learning disabilities? Because I seem to be really good at particular. If you give me the format in an audio or video, I'll grasp that concept a lot deeper than if I read it.
I think the most important thing is to realize that, one of the most amazing things about the human mind is that if you believe it, it has a tendency to become real.
Yes.
And so that's not to say that everything is a function of belief, right? It's not to say that, for example, dyslexia, which is well established, like the evidence for that is incredibly strong. We know that dyslexia is real. There's a really great book called Proust and the Squid, which is basically all a history of dyslexia, and talks about why dyslexics, for example, do very well very often in business and a lot of other things. And so it really seems to be that there are slight differences in brains on those levels. It's not to say that dyslexia doesn't exist, but the thing is that there's a big difference between something like dyslexia, which has hundreds of years of being established, and now we're starting to understand the neurological mechanisms, and you get a C on a math test, and you decide that you just didn't get the math gene, right? Like those two are not equivalent.
Yes, I see where you're going with that. I completely agree with you, and you can easily add to the compound the problem of someone having problems reading by telling them they're a bad reader. Exactly.
And the point is that, we never, as individuals, I think you never want to say what you can't do. You always want to approach it with a certain amount of skepticism and say, I don't think I can do this, I'm not totally sure, so let me just find out by doing it. And then you're going to see, okay, so I did, this. Like, I read these 3 books. And for example, one of the big ones is like a lot of times when people say I'm just not a reader, it's because they find books boring. But what they assume is that it's books in general rather than like you read boring books.
Yes.
Right?
I agree with that. There's some books I couldn't put down being if the writer speaks to you. And one book recently, which was a recommendation, was Against the Grain.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what a great book!
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna actually speak to Coach after
Coach
yeah, what a great author.
Yeah, Coach Bill's amazing, and I think that's the thing is that there are so many great books out there. But a large part of where the straight A conspiracy comes from is it comes out of our experiences of school, and it's an industrialized educational system, and they're trying to standardize things. And listen, standardization allows you to scale, and it makes all sorts of things possible. It's not that the industrialized education hasn't had wins. In the last 100 years, we've reached a place where there are many countries in the world with a 99% literacy rate. That's amazing. Like, that is standardization in action. And in the 1200s, the idea that the entire population would have some level of reading and writing would have been unimaginable.
Yeah.
But, like McDonald's, standardization comes at a cost, right? There's a lack of variety. It's not to everybody's taste. And, sometimes the food that is on offer is less than good for you or delicious, or it's a very big difference than, having Gwyneth Paltrow, hand you craft some meal for your metabolism.
That's great. That's actually something that I want to experience in my life. So there's a couple key concepts. Teaching, having peer-to-peer teaching was recommended by you, which when I learned that from doing physical things. I teach a lot of kickboxing to absolute beginners. So one thing I do automatically is make sure that they believe in themselves. If they don't believe in themselves, they won't be able to do the movements. And then I also I see how it's easier, and maybe Katie had mentioned this in one of the interviews, that because they can see my motion, they can more easily duplicate it, like monkey see, monkey do. Absolutely. But when you're thinking, I can't see it. Can you elaborate on that idea?
Well, that's, the huge difference, for example, between sports and academics, right? Like David Beckham, there's a great story that Beckham told, basically, where I don't remember what it was, but there was some corner kick that he did, and it was the most amazing corner kick in the world. And, he kicked it, and it just, curved from the corner right into the goal. And everybody was like, how did you do that? And, his manager or someone else basically said, I know how he did that. I saw him do it over and over for hours a day. Like, that was a move that he was working on in the same way that you would work on a move in, kickboxing or whatever else, like a special punch or something like that. The difference is that, if you're working on, you're trying to figure out, characters for a story, or you're trying to figure out, a stand-up bit, or you're trying to figure out, some nonfiction book, you're figuring out a theory like Guns, Germs, and Steel, well, most of that work happens in your head. The work is invisible. And so the difference is that because we don't see that invisible work, it's very easy to assume that it didn't happen at all. The example that we give in the book is, 2 kids are sitting in a class. The teacher asks them for their times tables. One of them knows the answer right away. What does the other one assume? Well, they assume, oh, that kid just knows it because they're 5. and they don't spend their time thinking about what did that other kid do? Were they practicing their times table with their dad? How are they? Maybe they have a different way of thinking about their times tables that makes it more accessible. That invisible work doesn't happen, and so especially in the world of anything that is mental, we just assume that, oh, you're doing nothing differently than me. But of course, I mean, if you look at your own mental life, you're pretty clear that your thoughts are probably not other people's thoughts.
Yeah, it would be super interesting. Well, I guess some of the books you recommended, The Next 100 Years, Singularity is Near, maybe we will be able to see what you're thinking.
Well, I actually have a buddy of mine who was a philosophy major, and one of our favorite sort of mental experiments is always asking, imagine if everyone in the world became telepathic, right? Like, what would happen? And just for the first 3 days, everybody would be like, you're sick, you're a disgusting human being. And then at a certain point, you would start to notice, oh, wait, like, there's a lot of similarities here. Actually, we're all just kind of the same.
Would you want a future like that?
It's actually, I mean, I think, listen, that's a question that we're, as a species and as individuals, really going to have to wrestle with in the next 30 years. I think the thing is that, every technology comes with benefits and every technology comes with costs. Agriculture extended people's lives beyond the 40-year mark, and it made people much better able to survive famines, but it did terrible things to their health. It reduced their amount of leisure time. The same is true with the internet. It makes it possible to find anything, but, Nicholas Carr has written a great book, The Shallows, which is, when you're Abraham Lincoln and you have access to a handful of books,
yes,
then you read those again and again and again, and you end up gleaning real depth from those books. When you're like, I can read everything ever written, you just sort of skim everything, and you don't get to the meat and potatoes of those things. So I think every technology, has benefits and has costs. I think it's not clear. I mean, in a world, the singularity is near. I mean, Kurzweil's particular obsession is the idea of human immortality. And, what happens? Like, how do people respond to that? I don't know. It's going to be, is that going to happen in our lifetimes? Is Kurzweil fudging the numbers because he'd like to believe that? I don't know.
There's a movie, it's probably not even that good of a movie, but the concept is fantastic, where they're basically, everybody's young, but you have a limited amount of time, and that's how wealthy you are. So you can trade time. So there's, extremely wealthy people that have 1 billion years.
Yeah.
But then again, do you really want to live that long, make room for the next generation? Sounds good to me. What do you think happens, Hunter, after we pass on here?
I mean, that's a big question.
Everything. You must think of it.
I'm going to side with Shakespeare on that, and say, Hamlet says that death is the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler shall return. Also the title of one of the Star Trek movies with William Shatner, but Shatner, that may have been a Freudian slip. But I think that's the thing. I mean, who the heck knows? I think, in general, I'm a materialist. I think that supernatural explanations. I think if you're not operating from the place that as soon as you allow yourself to go from what you can observe to let's imagine stuff, you get into real trouble. I think the thing is that I'm sorry. I think it's game over. I don't think that there's anything after that, and if anything, I think that just means that we have to make the most of the time that we have here.
Wow, damn. I didn't. Well, let's talk about which is a weird segue, but kind of not, because you're looking at the straight A conspiracy. You're looking at the data, so you want to actually that the data can't lie. How much does family play a part in this? When you talk about a lot of inner cities, broken families, education is not top priority. Do you feel like there is a little bit of this family component? Not a little bit. It's probably a lot of family component. What do you believe?
Again, it's not what I believe. I mean, there's a few things. I mean, what we did with the straight A conspiracy is that we just did an overview of all the research and brought it together in one place. So often, like with a question like this, there are multiple components of fields of research that feed into an answer like this. The first is we are incredibly social creatures. We are, America for the last 250 years has really been based on the idea of individualism. And that's part of who we are. Like, human beings definitely function as individuals. But you end up blinding yourself to the forces that are affecting you if you think that the group is not affecting you. It is, inevitably. And when they've done studies on this, they find that they ask people to basically self-report. Are you influenced by what other people think? Are you not influenced by what other people think? And you find that whether you think you're influenced by what other people think or whether you don't, you end up being influenced about the same by what other people think. So, inevitably, if you're living in a community, I think the most obvious example in terms of intelligence is language learning. My dad is Dutch, and when you're Dutch, the great certainty of your life is that no one will ever learn your language.
I was trying to look up how to say hello in Dutch. I had it this morning. It's hallo, right?
Well, it's full of all sorts of unattractive sounds. Yes. So, I have a friend who's Swedish, and he says that Dutch isn't a language; it's a throat disease, which is not entirely accurate. And there was a story that was floating around, like one of those great urban legends that are so funny you wish they were actually true. That speaking Dutch was linked to throat cancer, and so the Dutch were thinking of changing their national language to English. But fortunately not true. Just a funny story. But so for the Dutch, like every Dutchman pretty much learns Dutch, German, French, English as standard. Well, once you've learned 4 languages, it ends up you realize, oh, this is just a process. There's a way of doing this. It takes some work, but there's a smart way of working at this so that you get better. And that's why you very often meet Dutchmen and people from other kind of marginal languages that are surrounded by lots of other languages, whether that's people, like Thai speakers, or whether it's, Hungarians or noted language learners. I mean, these sorts of people end up learning lots and lots and lots of languages. And if this is a nation of immigrants, there were a lot of people who came over here speaking multiple languages. And guess what? In America, it's normal to speak one language. And if you meet anybody who speaks Spanish as well, who's, not Hispanic, or even if they are Hispanic, you're like, oh my God, that's so amazing. It's mind-blowing. And those beliefs affect us. Katie grew up in New Hampshire, and, the idea of like someone speaking multiple languages is so weird to her. But by the same token, I grew up around a bunch of effete bankers, and her dad is amazing with cars and can, and was basically really into the sort of, like in the 60s, like taking apart cars, putting them together, personalizing them, essentially the pimp my ride of the 60s version, like American Graffiti. And to me, like, that's so intimidating just because it's not what I'm used to. And so that's the thing. The beliefs affect us in a huge, huge way. We naturally pick those up. The other thing, too, just as if we're talking about the inner city, we had a friend of ours who was a teacher in Dorchester, Mass. For a long time. And Dorchester, Mass. Is not a good area. Like, it's not wealthy. It's not any of that. It's predominantly African American. All of the tragedies of African American life in the United States, urban life, they happen in Dorchester, Mass. And so she would say that when a door would slam down the hall, she would lose most of her students for the rest of the day, because for them that sudden sound basically would take them back emotionally to somebody being shot, the fear of the neighborhood, worrying about a brother who was in prison. So those sorts of, there are a lot of people who live, a lot of kids who are growing up in, traumatic experiences. And that trauma, we now know that emotions have the power to shut down our ability to think, right? I was so scared I couldn't think. That's actually true, right? That's caused by the amygdala, which is a tiny little thing in your brain. But so, emotional factors also make a huge, huge difference in terms of where you're growing up. And even if you're not growing up in those sorts of, circumstances, if it's also the emotional context around learning in general. I mean, my dad, you mentioned my parents, my dad is obsessed with books, with books. He always said, books are special. And if I would put a book down with too much force, like if I would drop a book, like they're sacred objects to him. And so inevitably I do a podcast that's all about books. I wrote a book. So how I feel about books obviously makes a huge difference because there are periods in my life when I read a lot and periods when I read a little, but that sort of baseline respect for books always keeps me coming back to books again and again and again and again.
So you like the paperback or Kindle, or do you listen to audiobooks?
Love audiobooks, obsessed with audiobooks, and I can't recommend them enough. People sometimes feel guilty about listening to audiobooks because they're like, it's not real. And it's ridiculous.
Okay, great. Say that louder, please, so my wife can hear that. Because it's much more convenient and depend on the reader, of course.
Yeah, and you have to be smart as well because some audio. Firstly, I'll say it again per your request. You get just as much benefit from reading an audiobook as you do from reading a book. They're different experiences, right? But I think that, there's definitely a huge difference between reading a book and watching a movie,
sure,
right? And so people are right to appreciate those differences. I mean, the difference between, Alice in Wonderland, the Disney movie, I love, but I'm obsessed with the book of Alice in Wonderland. It's so much richer. It's so much better. I mean, they're different experiences, but I mean, the book is just so, so rich. When you do... And I think you just have to be discerning about what's a good audiobook and what's a book that you should really read. Because, I mean, something like Alice in Wonderland, you might find some awesome narrators who really bring some life to that and all that sort of stuff. But so much of the fun of reading a book like Alice in Wonderland is you coming up with your own mental pictures, your own world, your own vision and understanding of that. On the other hand, a book like The Next 100 Years, essentially that's a series of here's some facts, here's some perspective, here's some interesting things you didn't know. It's not, you're not like filling it in with, what does my turkey look like? There is a turkey. It looks like a particular thing. I mean the country, not the animal.
I can't believe they're going to backstab us. I mean, why would they do that? Japan? How could you do that? I'm already mad at them.
Yeah, it's pretty apt. But that's the important thing. I mean, it's a lot like being in a relationship. The key is to project into the future and start being pissed off at people for things they haven't done yet.
Yes, I like that. We should send them notice. So many great ideas, so many great recommendations. What do you feel like is your purpose here, Hunter, for the next 5 years? Do you think about that, or do you?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I can't remember if it was Socrates or Plato, but one of those great dudes. But he always said that the best years of a man's life are the last years of his life, if he can look back on a life of accomplishment. And I think about that a lot. I mean, a lot of my friends from college are now investment bankers.
Sure.
And they're making a lot of money, not the kind of money that people made investment banking in the 90s, but still a lot of money. But I wonder, aged 80, what are they going to be able to look back on? And so, I think you want to, in a certain sense, live your life in two directions. You want to live it forward, make sure that you're enjoying it as you're going, but you also want to make sure that you're storing up interesting experiences, things that you're contributing to the community, so that, you're also storing up memories that you can, look back on fondly and, be proud of at the same time. For me, I mean, my sort of singular obsession, it goes back to what we were talking about, which is, why was I sitting in that air-conditioned car in Brazil, and why had that kid grown up with parents who, through their own desperate poverty and fear, had mutilated their own child? And that's, I mean, it's that I had done nothing. There was nothing I had done to earn that experience. B, like, what a waste of human potential. C, what an assault on human dignity. Like, that kid should not have to go through that. I mean, we're just missing out on so much, and especially when you look at all the science in the straight A conspiracy, the point is that if that kid had grown up in a different environment, he would be writing books. And, he would be contributing in all these different ways. And so that's the thing. I think there's so much, we look at the world, we see all these problems, and we tend to think that because we've grown up in the age of genius, that some genius is going to come along and they're going to invent something that's going to solve our problems for us. And that's not how human beings have solved their problems historically. If you look at, the hunter-gatherers, they figured out agriculture, they figured out all of these things, but it was really everybody attacking the problem, and over time you chip away at it. And there are 7 billion potential geniuses on this planet, and if we can unlock the potential of all of us, then we're going to solve our problems so much faster than we will ever do it when there's only a tiny fraction of people involved.
Well, that brings me to, I'm going to pull a Bryan Callen here. Not that I can do him justice, but if you're king for a day or a month, and I know it's so big to change everything, but if you were going to change maybe the educational system, do you think about how you would do it if there was no red tape, you just did what you wanted?
Well, I mean, again, firstly, I think aristocracy is something I despise.
Okay.
Monarchy is something I despise. So the Romans had the concept of the dictator as somebody who would come in times of extreme crisis, fix something, and then step down, right? That's actually where George Washington got the idea from. There was this guy called Cincinnatus who famously was asked to be dictator and then actually stepped down afterwards, which people almost never did. And he did it twice and just went back to farming his cabbages. And so that was George Washington's model, was always that. So I think, the first thing is I would want to be a Cincinnatus. Okay. And fix things and then give up power, because I think that's the most powerful example that you can give of your commitment to democracy and all that sort of stuff. I would say for if we're talking about for the United States, for education, firstly, mostly education is not a resource problem. It's not a problem that the government can solve. It's a cultural problem. It's, what is it when a student gets back a bad test, what do? Do they look at their mistakes? Do they analyze them? Do they learn from them? Or do they think that mistakes are a sign that they're an idiot and bury them in the bottom of their backpack? There are procedures you can implement in schools. Like, that would be the number one thing I would do in schools, would be essentially, school would be about analyzing process. It would no longer be about, we have this information to cram into your head in this specified amount of time. What we're really, like, our major objective over these 15 years or 14 years is to teach you how to teach yourself. Because ultimately, we live in the 21st century. We have no idea what you're going to need to know for your job. Like, technologies change all the time. Industries appear, they disappear, they change so radically that they're unrecognizable. So the industrial age idea that we're going to give you the knowledge that you will need for the rest of your life is ridiculous. And it should really just be focused on, teaching you how to teach yourself, analyzing your mistakes. What are the reasons why mistakes can happen? Careless errors. The rules were not clear enough. You didn't do the reading. You never opened the textbook. Why did you never open the textbook? Like, these are the things that we should be figuring out, so that talking about invisible work, so that kids are realizing, the issue's not me, it's the way that I'm working. So that's what I would do for education. And I think, the president also has a huge pulpit to be able to spread ideas, and if I was him, I would basically hold up, talk to Carol Dweck, right? Talk to Martin Seligman. Talk to, all of the work on neuroplasticity, right? All of the work on emotions. Like, let's talk about all of this stuff so that you understand it has never been an issue of you, and the founding principle of this country that all men are created equal Thomas Jefferson may have had a hard time living up to that personally, but it turns out to be broadly true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah.
I fantasize one day being able to teach inner city children, entrepreneurship online, and when I think about it, I really think about I have to keep selling them from teaching kickboxing classes. At all times, I have to sell the members and the clients on why they're doing it, like what they're getting out of it, and keep reframing it as I'm here to facilitate their absolute success. And all I want is them to do extremely well if they are and influence the world. So I know teachers I meet a lot of teachers that are just beaten down, and if we could maybe implement just a couple. Have you seen that being implemented at all? I feel like it is in charter schools.
Yeah, there are people who are definitely doing these things. I mean, and there are a lot of charter schools that have had tremendous success. I think the thing is that, and we've definitely, I mean, that's the thing. We've also had the opportunity, we've done some work with the Harlem Academy in New York, and they're doing great stuff. And they're also, I mean, I think the nice thing is that the people realize that essentially a lot of what they're being handed by the government is just what they're being handed by the government. And then there are schools like the Harlem Academy that's like, oh, we really like your book. Can you come speak to our students? Or, oh, we really like the research of this person. There is more and more experimentation going on, but I think that's the thing. I mean, I think we have to take it even past the school level and really take it down to the individual level. And I think that already that's something that you're seeing happening. People are being much more experimental with their exercise, with the way that they're eating. There's the whole biohacking movement. People are really trying to figure out their own learning. They're not relying on authorities. They'll read, my book, they'll read Tim Ferriss's, they'll read Waitskin's, they'll read all of those books, Dan Coyle's The Talent Code, and they're like, I like that bit, let me try this. Oh, now I get what he was talking about with this, So people are much more, doing that, and it's being much more personalized and customized. So I think that's happening. I just think we need to do it more. And partly it's also, I mean, there's sort of the adoption curve, right? You're an early adopter. You're the sort of person who is already actively trying to figure these things out, and there will be later and later and later adopters. The problem is that innovations don't always diffuse because they're good. There's a really good book that I reference all the time, which is The Diffusion of Innovations by Everett Rogers. And he gives the example of basically preventing scurvy by, eating a piece of orange, lemon, lime, whatever, right? Scurvy is a horrific disease. It basically causes your body to no longer produce collagen, so literally the protein that holds your flesh together is not there, so your flesh starts falling apart, And if you look at a lot of these early voyages, people like Magellan, like half the crew was dying of scurvy. Like it's just like a horrific...
I'm thinking about just 30 dudes falling apart.
Yeah, it's horrific. Listen, they make all these horror films with these sort of elaborate settings. No, just watch a ship leave Europe, go around the world, and watch the dudes around you fall apart until they die. That's a horror film, and nobody knows why it is. But, the fix for that couldn't be simpler, right? Suck on a piece of citrus fruit. And between them really figuring out what the fix was and it actually being implemented, about 200 years, A
little too long.
So, yeah, way too long. And I mean, that's the all we did with the straight A conspiracy was take research that was out there that 99.99% of the population didn't know about, and also these different fields are not talking to each other, and then put them in one place and package them for kids. And we need people to do that more, that's the point. Like, I want people to understand, yes, we've written this book. These ideas are not ours. Yes. We're just packaging them, and people need to go out and repackage them. I mean, for example, the MMA guys, Brendan Schaub, right, who's buddies with Bryan, I've talked to him about this before. I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but I would love, love, love for the MMA guys to be going out there and saying, this is how my practice works. This is how all practice works. this is something you should be applying in your life, not just in, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and all that sort of stuff, but it's also in how you do your job. Like if you want to, learn how to computer program so you don't have to have your, shit desk job and can actually be making some independent money, whatever it is, like that's how all learning works. Because the point is that those MMA guys can reach their fans in a way that I cannot. I'm sorry, I'm just not as credible in that world.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. And those, I guess so you want Brendan Schaub to implement the principles of the straight A conspiracy.
Brendan Schaub already does implement the principles of the straight A conspiracy.
To a larger
yeah, but
audience.
He just needs to. He doesn't even need to mention my book. At the end of the day, I'd love to sell books, but we just need all of these people who, celebrities essentially. Like celebrities can reach people. Like Taylor Swift. Listen, I love Taylor Swift's music, but right?
I'm not
it's fun. It's fun, but Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has hundreds of millions of Twitter followers, right? And if Taylor Swift knows how to learn. She knows how to get good at things. And if she was to come out and say, hey guys, by the way, what I do with my music is what you need to be doing with algebra, is what you need to be doing with that. And you got all of these different celebrities from all these, you get Macklemore, you get all of these guys from all these different walks of life saying, hey, practice works the same for everybody, and it all takes practice. Then you would really start to move the dial.
Well, I guess now you're going to hit head on with marketing. And Brazil's an interesting country because they don't allow billboards publicly in the cities. Is that correct?
I'll take your word for it.
I believe it. The whole thing in most of these quick marketing schemes is tell somebody there's a secret.
Yeah.
And you can instantly have it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, people just won't buy. But if there was credible people, when you mention a book, I'd buy it immediately. That's why you should have a book club. As a quick side note, if the Straight A Conspiracy goes to audio, the amount of downloads you guys are going to get is going to be incredible. So don't make me read it with my Hoboken accent.
We're doing that this summer, actually. We're doing the audiobook, so it will be coming in the next month or so.
I would love that. I'm sure I would love to see something on TV as well, breaking it down further. But I wanted to find out how your experience with co-writing a book. Are you good at collaborating? Is that?
Well, I think, listen, if I had written this book, it would be utterly unreadable. Katie comes from, she majored in English, and, she comes from a strong theater background and all that sort of stuff. I come from a biochemistry background. I come from a science background. And it's really, really funny, actually, because, when the thing that really caught my attention was hearing all these kids say things like a math gene. I didn't get the math gene. I don't have a natural ear for languages, right? And so I'm thinking about this very rationally, and I'm like, there is, computers, science. You can't say this does not compute, right? And I'm like, I'm going to find so much evidence, and I'm going to present these kids with this evidence, and I'm going to be like, science! And then they're going to change their minds. But of course, Katie, basically, because she came from this humanity English perspective, realized the real issue is emotions. These kids are stressed out. They hate their lives. They don't want to do this stuff. And, ultimately, it turned out that, that was the piece that she was initially focused on. It turned out to be even more true. We now understand that, by and large, most of our decisions are made emotionally. And then afterwards, we come up with a reason. So it's that kids feel stupid, and then afterwards, they're like, let me make this sound reasonable, math gene, right? But the math gene is serving the emotion rather than the other way around. And so, firstly, the book would not, in terms of the understanding, I wouldn't have even looked probably at the piece that was emotions if it wasn't that Katie kept on talking about it, and I was like, oh, I'm so annoyed that she keeps talking about emotions. What are emotions? You can't define it, must find out. So there's that. I think also more importantly, just making it fun and readable and all of that sort of stuff, again, would not have been possible without her. So, I think it's hugely helpful to collaborate. And I think we need a lot more collaboration because, two heads are better than one. People have different perspectives. And I think naturally that is how humans solve problems.
So your ego then come into play and say, listen, I want my own book. I want to hold a book that has Hunter Maats, my book, that didn't come into play.
No, that's not listen, it's not that I don't have ego. Like, I definitely have ego. But that's not the particular way that my ego expresses itself. It's more like, I want to change the world. Like, that's the ego that I have. And I was, at least self-aware enough to realize this book will be unreadable if I don't collaborate with someone. And I mean, I think the other thing that I would say too is, why is it that Katie and I have that split? Well, in large part, it's because of the straight A conspiracy. We think that there are humanities people, and therefore they don't think of themselves as science people. I thought of myself as a science person, and made fun of commas, which is one of the things we talk about in the book. It just was like, this is stupid. Like, you put these little curves at some point. Like, I used to think of commas like sprinkles that you put on a cake afterwards as an afterthought. You write the essay, and then you'd be like, okay, let's put some of those in. And then, my B-word teacher would be like, wrong. And I was like, that's so unfair. Like, why do you hate my commas, but you like his commas? So
I really encourage everybody, by the way, to listen to the first Bryan Callen Hunter Maats podcast. When it's you guys, I call it Bryan Callen Hunter Maats, and when he does comic, Bryan Callen. And his description of Katie is so damn hilarious.
Yeah.
Just her running through wheat fields teaching is so funny. Maybe we need to talk to her at some point. And I'm glad. I think that it made it extremely readable. So I think you were 1,000% on the mark, and touche to you to even consider that, because I would have produced the most unreadable book ever. I want to get, before I let you go, I want to get just a couple questions in for my personal curiosity, if that's okay, and you don't have to answer them. But you studied, or you worked at the Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory, correct? And you worked kind of with James Watson and Francis Crick, correct?
Well, James Watson. So James Watson and Francis Crick together discovered the double helical structure of DNA, and pretty much ushered in the era of genetics. James Watson is at Cold Spring Harbor. Francis Crick was actually out here in California. Francis has passed away now, but James is still very much alive and kicking.
So there is this rumor that he came up with the concept possibly when he was on psychedelics. Do you know if that's true? Do you look at psychedelics as something that it could actually help make people kind of change their mindset? It's a controversial question, but it's somewhat interesting.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt, like Jonathan Haidt, who we also had on the podcast. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his name. It's Haidt. But he studies the experience of transcendence. That's one of the things he studies, which is, that basically religious experiences, that sense of being lifted out of yourself and a part of something larger. And he studies that as people get to it sort of in various sort of natural ways, whether it be through singing, which sort of causes yourself to drop away and you're part of a larger group. Marching, marching in militaries has a way of basically getting the self to drop away. And psychedelics definitely do. Like, there's no doubt, essentially, that psychedelics, cause people, basically, that they mimic the neurotransmitters, and they create that experience of being lifted out of yourself. There's a famous study that was done, I think, in the 60s. I actually think it was done in the basement of the Harvard Church. And they took 20 divinity students, and they gave half of them niacin, basically vitamin B, as a placebo, and then the other half of them psychedelic mushrooms. And they did a follow-up study, and basically, they did a follow-up study, and for of the half, like, they were able to interview 19 out of the 20, and of the half that had taken the psychedelic mushrooms, they still described that experience as one of the most significant of their lives. And that's because they've had that experience of transcendence. I mean, there's no doubt that that experience of transcendence is incredibly impactful. Occasionally, when it's really profound, it changes the course of your life. Certainly that was the way that, I mean, if you look at the Aztecs and the Incas, that was how they used those drugs. I personally choose not to, just because, the brain, the body is an incredibly sensitive piece of equipment. And with a lot of these drugs, what you're doing is you're just pouring a lot of neurotransmitter over there and causing it to fire in all sorts of crazy ways. That's the thing. Something like Coke, right? Like cocaine. I mean, you're literally, what the Coke does is it mimics dope. It basically, it creates this experience of like suddenly there are massive levels of dopamine effectively in your brain. And so it's kind of like, yeah, can you get the jukebox to do crazy things if you start shoving a screwdriver in there?
Sure.
Yes, sure. But like, do you want to do that? I personally wouldn't. I mean, that's the thing is it's not, these drugs are not subtle tools, okay, right? They're not targeted. They're very, so I mean, that's the thing. I just, I value this a lot, and I personally wouldn't want to mess with it unduly.
Good. Appreciate that. That brings us to, what about smart drugs? What about the people, Adderalls, antidepressants, Ritalin, all this stuff? What do you think?
Again, the interesting thing is, so there's a great book, Boys Adrift, which is basically, why are girls doing so much better in school and why are boys doing worse? And a large part of that is ADHD. And specifically the prescription of these medications, which is a huge thing in the United States, not a big thing in somewhere like Finland, which, for example, is the second best educational system in the world. So, clearly you can have a successful educational system without this sort of massive prescription of drugs. The interesting thing is that there's a study in Boys Adrift where they were allowed to give ADHD medications to people with ADHD who had been diagnosed as having ADHD and people who didn't. And it did the exact same thing whether you did or you didn't. Because essentially, it's amphetamines, like it's speed. And, when people are on speed, they become incredibly focused, incredibly intense, and all of that stuff. But the problem with a lot of those drugs is, and again, this is why, I personally wouldn't want to deal with any drugs, is there are long-term consequences. It's pretty clear that while those drugs can generate intense focus over short amounts of time, over the long term, it starts to mess with motivation. A lot of these people find that their motivational systems are kind of burned out. And what good is the ability to be able to focus intensely if you can't motivate yourself to focus intensely and consistently on certain things? So, a large part of this just also comes out of my dad's family. They were all doctors back to the 1200s. And after all of those years, they'd sort of realized two things, like things that are passed on. Right? The first one was leave it alone. Like, if in doubt, do nothing, because the body is going to be much, much better at fixing it than you will. Like, medical science, in some ways, is very sophisticated. There's some things that are very good at. There are a lot of things where, I was talking to someone the other day, and she, messed up her shoulder, like her rotator cuff. And they're like, yeah, it's broken. Like, it's definitely, there's something wrong with it. Can't tell you what it is. Can't do much about it. You just sort of have to rest it, right? And that's what a lot of this stuff comes down to. So, I think in general, leave it alone unless you're really sure that it's going to do something. And then the second, which is actually, for me personally, probably the biggest insight for the straight-A conspiracy, is that what makes a great doctor is not the ability to write a prescription or perform a surgical procedure. It's the ability to diagnose. That's what House does on House. He's able to sort through all of the confusing data and find the signal in the noise. And that's really, I think that's going to do a lot more good for you in your learning, is to be able to look at, I'm not understanding this page, right? Let me figure out exactly why. Oh, it's because I don't understand this word. It's, because I wasn't paying attention in the last 3 pages and I need to go back and reread those 3 pages. That essentially metacognition, or thinking about your own thinking, is, the National Academy of Sciences wrote this huge thing called How People Learn, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. And that's basically the big takeaway. Like, effective students, they don't say effective students are ones who take smart drugs. They say effective students are the ones who think about their own thinking. And, I mean, that's the thing. Look at the people that you most respect intelligence-wise, right? Probably people like, Lincoln, Socrates, Plato, Marie Curie. I mean, whoever the heck it is, Albert Einstein. None of these people, I guarantee you, use smart drugs. Abraham Lincoln did not take Ritalin. He did not take Adderall. The way that he did it was basically thinking. Yeah.
What was his book? I just remember reading that passage where he's just like taking his goods down to Mississippi all the way to New Orleans, and you're just like, this guy has got some life set up where he has to. I'm not in a good way, but
yeah,
it's just an incredible man.
And I mean, I think that's the thing is, and particularly for Americans, Carol Dweck, who is her research. Carol Dweck's at Stanford. We actually interviewed her. We interviewed her recently on the podcast. That episode is posting soon. Yeah, but she, she teaches this intro seminar at Stanford, and you have all of these super type A kids who have always been the best in high school, and now you're taking them from their small high school to Stanford University. And so suddenly they're like, the shoe's about to drop. Everybody's about to find out I'm not that smart. Like, I'm now in such a huge pond. And one of the things, the purpose of the class is basically to get them past all of those ideas about what they can't do and just get them focused on the process rather than, their own self-worth. But one of the things she does, which is, I did without even realizing that she did, and is the first chapter of the book, is look at your heroes. Like, pick one of your heroes, whoever your biggest hero is, and just, start reading books about them. Start researching their biography. Start looking at the things that they did. And what's going to happen is that, this sense of awe, right, that they are this magical creature, and wouldn't it be nice to be so magical, will drop away. And you'll start to see, oh, these are the things they did. Oh, my God, that's amazing. I would strongly recommend for everyone, Frederick Douglass's and Booker T. Washington's autobiographies are awesome. Up from Slavery is a really, really, really good book. And then also Ben Franklin's autobiography is amazing.
Really?
Because it was so good. Like, it's very, very accessible. But what you really get is that, it's just like, the man, it's work. It's work, and he has these procedures, and it's really funny. Like, there's a one of the things that he did, because Ben Franklin was an indentured servant, right? Like, he didn't have a whole, he was basically locked into this deal, this apprenticeship. He chose printing as his apprenticeship. He really wanted to write articles. He knew that his brother would never let him write articles. So he basically started writing these articles and then blind submitting them, like pretending that they had been, some anonymous person had submitted these articles. But a large part of how he developed those skills is there was this magazine that he loved called The Spectator, which was this comedy magazine from England. And what he would do is he would read these articles, and then he would rewrite them himself, and then do a side-by-side comparison of his version and their version, and see what had they done differently, what had they done better, what had he done better. And by doing this again and again and again and again, he started to basically develop those skills of comedy and humor and all of that sort of stuff. But it's a really smart, fascinating exercise, and you're like, oh, I can see that if I did that, I would get better. Rather than just you read, like, the Silence Dogood letters, or you read, like some of the amazingly funny quotes from Ben Franklin, and you're like, guy's just funny. There's a real process that's at work there. And there are so many, like, other little delightful things. My other two favorites are, that he's on, for a long time Ben Franklin tried to be a vegetarian, or was a vegetarian, and at some point he's on a journey to England, and there are these New Englanders on there, and they're cooking up cod. And, he's like, they're cooking up cod in that New England way, which I don't know what that New England way is, but they, with, like, probably bacon and who the heck knows what else, right? And he's like, it smelled so good. But I knew that this didn't fit with what I'd committed to doing, which was not eating meat. And then he says, but it is such a wonderful thing to be a rational creature, because you can convince yourself of the right of doing whatever it is that you feel like doing. And I mean that's something that we now understand from neuroscience, and that goes back to like people feel things, and then they afterwards come up with a math gene to justify that. But Ben Franklin, just through self-observation, observing others, really just paying attention, again, not smart drugs, he observed those things, and then did the work to basically craft, and I can't remember the exact quote, so I'm sure he said it in a much funnier way than I did, but then really crafting out the way to like deliver that line so it has the maximum punch, and yeah.
No, I that's fascinating. Do you read Nassim Taleb at all? The Black Swan?
Yeah, I mean, I read The Black Swan. Anti-Fragility is actually an audiobook that I'm about to listen to. But, I mean, The Black Swan was pretty amazing. Taleb is, I would love to get him on the podcast.
You have to do that. I'm going to stop you. It's literally impossible. I've called the office over there. He is very, very agitated. So you're going to have to get him on. He's not going to talk to me.
Well, I think a large part of it is, too, for a lot of these authors, they sort of don't really know what to think of the podcasting world.
Yes.
And so they're sort of like, this is some random dude. Like, what is the deal? Like, this is not NBC. This is not CBS. And I think that's the thing. I mean, I know for a lot of the authors we've had on who have never done a podcast, they're like, oh, that was really enjoyable and actually much better than a lot of those TV interviews because they're not so canned. They're much more candid. And yeah, you get an opportunity. I mean, like, that's the point. Like, one of the things that for me was, because I sort of stumbled into the whole podcasting thing just because I was like, Bryan, you're booking porn stars. You like books. Why are you booking porn stars? Not that, porn stars aren't humans, but they just don't, in general, have as many interesting things to say as some of the authors that we've had on. Because they've done less thinking. When we had Jared Diamond on, we got Jared Diamond talking about male lactation, which is awesome because how many times does Jared Diamond get interviewed and get to talk about male lactation?
I hope never. Well, I'm guessing never. Who is your favorite guest? Mine is Michael Callen. I love when Michael Callen.
People love Big Mike. Big Mike is amazing. I in some senses I grew up with Big Mike. When I was born, the first house I went to after leaving the hospital was the Callen household.
Is he big? Is he literally bigger than Bryan?
Mike's huge. Like, he's a bear. He's not. He's a bear trapped in a man's body. He's like giant, like huge hands, just like big Western shoulders. Like, yeah, he's a real presence. And, he's got this very sort of stentorian voice, Mike Callen. Bryan, listen, Big Mike is amazing. And that whole sort of Citibank crew that sort of was there in the 70s and 80s. I think that was a very, very special time in the history of Citibank. And, they really had a sort of very worldly purpose, a real sort of sense of that. I mean, yeah, Big Mike's amazing. I think for me, there are guests who, like, it's funny because, there are certainly guests who I've been like, oh my God, like Coach Bill. I didn't know what to think of Coach Bill. And then, I love the book, but then you talk to him and you're like, what a great guy. Yeah. Like, it's a fundamentally decent human being. And then I think probably the most significant for me was talking to Jared Diamond because, I read his book when I was 18 and have pretty much had him on a giant pedestal ever since then. And so, to be able to actually talk to him for an hour and to be able to, destroy some of that awe and just really get, oh, this person who I've revered for so long is just another human being. He did 20 years of research on this, and that's why he is where he is. Like that, to be. I think that's the most important. Steve Jobs. There's a thing I recently found. It was a video clip of Steve Jobs talking. And Bryan's mentioned it on the show a couple of times, but Steve Jobs basically says, at a certain point, you realize that the world around you was created by people who are no smarter than you.
Yes.
Once you realize that, then nothing is ever the same, because you realize it can be done better. You realize that you can do pretty much anything you want, and that you can make it in whatever way you want. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the purpose of the Straight A Conspiracy. That was, even having written that book and thought about that so much, meeting and talking to Jared Diamond was huge for me, just because, he's just another guy. And that's awesome, because I so thoroughly respect what he did, and I'm like, oh wait, like maybe I could do a Guns, Germs, and Steel or something like that, Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you can. Do you have somebody on a hit list? Do you want to get Obama? Do you want to get who do you want to get in that podcast studio?
I mean, we've got it. I mean, listen, Lawrence Lessig would be huge. Like, I would love to get Lawrence Lessig, who wrote Republic Lost. Basically talking about campaign finance. That would be huge. I mean, Lessig is, he's now doing a super PAC. Basically, his latest thing is, we can't get money out of politics, so let's just create a super PAC that's for the people, and essentially drown out that big money. Whether it works or not, it's definitely going to bring a lot more attention to what Lessig is doing in campaign finance. So Lessig would be huge. And then actually in the fall, we have two of my intellectual heroes coming on. Francis Fukuyama, who is amazing. The funny thing is that everybody knows Francis Fukuyama for The End of History and The Last Man. His most recent book, which was The Origins of Political Order, Part 1, is mind-blowing. Like, it's so good. And it's, I think, better than The Origins of Political Order. It really benefits from that extra decade of thinking or whatever. And The Origins of Political Order Part 2 is coming out, so we'll be interviewing him about that, which will be huge. And then Stephen Pinker, who also is a boss, and super, super excited to talk to him. I think, we all sort of know who are the big missing pieces. Nassim Taleb, Lawrence Lessig, like these are the big fish that we haven't bagged yet, but we'll get them.
And Alexis, Texas, I'm sure Brian's going to book.
I don't know if Debbie is still doing Dallas.
He'll figure out. He'll find somebody. I think that for today, this has been, my brain is now swollen. I need to put it on some ice, but everything you said was just perfect. I really want to learn how to really hold a conversation the way you do, Hunter. It's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. You've done so much for me, and I'm thousands of others. So we're going to push. We're going to believe. We're going to buy up the book, not only because it's a great book, but we're supporting the idea that we want Hunter to produce a lot of books.
Listen, I would love that.
Yeah,
I just think that's the point. Is that I think that we. Wherever you are, like, I think the Straight A Conspiracy has affected all of us. Like, the point is that, after 10 years of thinking about this stuff, reading all the research, still, what it comes down to is, I was intimidated by Jared Diamond. Like, you're always going to have those things, and I think it's just constantly, it is that Steve Jobs idea, just chipping away at the idea that, that is not for you is not true. Like, just destroy that idea. It's just work, and the work can be enjoyable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. So I'll put in all the Twitter and additional information. If there's anything you need at all, you want me to bug Nassim Taleb some more, really get him cagey, and then you can come and sweep in. If there's anything you guys ever need, we're here. And I would like to continue this in a couple months after I've read all these books. And
yeah, absolutely.
So.
And also, get Katie back on. She's...
Well, that would be fantastic. We need you, Hunter, to convince her to get out of the wheat field.
Well, there is a lot of wheat to run through. You think about how many hectares of wheat there are in the world. She's just like constantly.
And if you think they cut the wheat up like from the top of the United States all the way down, so she's just out front.
she's out there full time. You know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has like a really hectic schedule for her. Like, you know, she's in Kansas right now doing great work. Just, you know, so yeah, you know, around the clock. Well,
I really thank you. I will follow it up with an email. Thank you so much, Hunter.
Oh, thank you, my man. This was really great.